Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to AP World History Vocabulary. We're talking today about Chapter 35 and the end of the Cold War. Specifically, we're going to look at the collapse of the Soviet Union and then the rise of terrorism and the focus of United States foreign policy on eliminating terrorist organizations. So we'll begin with, the end of the Soviet Union. So let's talk about Mikhail Gorbachev and his policies of Glasnost and Perestroika, and then two other Russian leaders, Boris Yeltsin and modern-day Vladimir Putin. And we'll throw the Berlin Wall in there, and then we'll talk about the Persian Gulf War, Al-Qaeda, and the War on Terror. So this is kind of a lot, but let's begin with some of the basic themes of the end of the Cold War. So in the 1980s, it became very clear that the Soviet Union was economically doing worse than the United States, and that some tensions were rising that needed to be addressed. Mikhail Gorbachev in the 1980s was the Soviet Union's leader who demonstrated some willingness to start to make some changes to Soviet society in order to make it more successful and better for the people. So Mikhail Gorbachev was important because he began the process of dismantling the Soviet Union and restructuring it into what it would become, which was a non-communist democratic nation of Russia. Mikhail Gorbachev worked closely with then President Ronald Reagan, started to take away some of the older aspects of the Soviet Union and communism in Soviet Russia, and instituted two major policies which kind of helped that out. The first one was Glasnost. And Glasnost, you can kind of remember what that means because there's that word glass, that English word glass in it, and glass tends to be transparent. And Glasnost basically means transparency. Transparency means that the government is operating without any veil of secrecy, that the people know exactly what's going on. In the old version of communism, decisions were made without any clear reason why, and policies were shaped kind of behind closed doors, and the people had no idea what was happening. So Gorbachev's policy of Glasnost aimed at opening up that political process and showing the people what was happening at the national level. His other economic policy was Perestroika. Perestroika was this economic restructuring. And what that means is basically the Soviet Union started to adopt some of the things that China would also adopt, which is a more capitalistic economy, allowing for more private business and key elements of economy that would allow the people of the Soviet Union to gain more economic freedoms and advance economically. So they were modeled after the Western capitalism. Boris Yeltsin came to power after Mikhail Gorbachev, and Boris Yeltsin was the one who officially kind of put an end to communist rule in Russia. And Boris Yeltsin was faced with some pretty tremendous pressures from outside. So first of all, the Soviets around the Soviet Union had begun rebelling and basically going against the Russians. And so this tension added to, the feeling of that it wasn't going to stay together very long. In addition, in Germany, East Germany was still separated from West Germany, and the Berlin Wall still stood. But by the 1990s, the Berlin Wall began to come down. People started to, in 1989, break down the Berlin Wall and reunite the city of Berlin. And this dismantling of the Berlin Wall basically meant, because it was literally a symbol of the division between communism and democracy. And so this Berlin Wall falling down in Germany, I shouldn't say falling down because it was torn down or hammered down. The people quite emotional about taking it down. I personally was 9 years old and remember watching these scenes on the news and seeing my parents well up in tears for the first time that I'd ever seen them cry, and they kind of hugged each other and they said, the Cold War is over. And so this was basically the end of the Cold War. The people of Germany were determined to reunite, and this pressure led Boris Yeltsin to basically ending communist rule in Russia. So the Soviet Union dismantled and went through the process of basically democratization and rebuilding. So many of the former Soviets became independent nations. And this was, again, about 25 years ago, and we still kind of see some of these tensions in the news today. The Ukraine was a former Soviet, and Russia now wants to take back Ukraine. So this is now 25 years later, we see the man in charge of Russia, which is democratic now, is Vladimir Putin. Now, Vladimir Putin has been in charge since the, middle of the first decade of the 2000s, so right around 2006, 2007, and has taken charge and kind of led Russia back down a little bit of an autocratic path. So the most recent years in Russian democracy has been a move toward more authoritarian power and kind of this very non-democratic feel to the government. Russia has been attacked by multiple democracies, saying that, and by its own people, saying that some of these processes aren't very democratic. So that's the most recent that we can get to in Russia since the end of the Cold War. Now, the Middle East has been another situation altogether, and so we'll focus on this with relations that began in Iraq and the Persian Gulf War, and then move up to the War on Terror. So in 1991, Iraq, which was led by Saddam Hussein, who was basically a dictator of Iraq, had defeated or was at war, a very long, bloody war with Iran, and the leaders of the Iranian Revolution, the Shia Muslims who were running that Iranian Revolution, their neighbors. Iraq was on kind of a roll of military victories and invaded this tiny nation of Kuwait. And Kuwait is right on the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf is home to a lot of oil reserves, and Kuwait was a very oil-rich nation. This angered many Western and even Arab states, and they created a coalition led by the United States to go in and defeat Iraq. And so it was a relatively short war, and it demonstrated very quickly U.S. military superiority in warfare. And Iraq was defeated and pulled back. Saddam Hussein remained in charge, however, but was limited, and the Americans left a presence in the West. Now, many Middle Easterners who viewed the United States as an outside power viewed the West as kind of an attack on conservative Islam, began to formulate ways to strike back at the United States. And one of these groups that was very very radical terrorist organization formed, known as Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda was led by Osama bin Laden, who were extreme radicals who saw the United States incursion as a threat to Islam and a threat to the traditional Islamic way of life. And so they began planning ways in order to get the United States out. Well, the United States had demonstrated their military power. It's fairly obvious that nobody was going to be able to take on the United States in a direct warfare. And so terrorist acts become the norm, and it's a way to attack a larger nation. In a way, it's guerrilla warfare, basically, because it's a way to attack non-traditionally and strike fear, psychological fear, into a larger opponent. And so the attack on 9/11/2001, which was orchestrated by Al-Qaeda, at least claimed to be orchestrated by Al-Qaeda in 2001, was a successful attack on the United States using commercial airliners to smash into the Twin Towers and other targets, which did shift U.S. foreign policy completely, and it took the idea of terrorism to a new level, and the people of the United States rallied behind their government in order to hunt down these terrorist groups. And so that led to this war on terror, and the war on terror is ongoing. It's not aimed at any one religious group or ethnic group. It is now aimed at any organization which is attempting to disrupt through violent means. And so that's been the new focus of American foreign policy since the end of the Cold War. Spreading democracy is kind of like goal number 1, and fighting terrorists is goal number 2. So that's all I really got for you on this video. That's Chapter 35. I'll be back with a little bit of information on Chapter 36. It'll probably be one of the last videos before you take this AP exam. I'll throw up some other tips and hints as we go through this. But life is good. So be awesome. You got a couple weeks to study. Do your best.